Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi mining community, welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Nick Bell, who's a global sector leader in mining and minerals and metals at Worley, who are a global leader in the engineering, project delivery and consultancy for the energy, chemicals and resources sector. And they help customers achieve sustainable transformation, net zero targets and innovative solutions. Nick has a background in metallurgy and engineering and has worked for some of the leading engineering consultancies during his career. We're going to talk about some of the biggest challenges that the mining industry is facing, trust in our industry, the risks and opportunities in automation and long-term global trends that will shape our mining industry over the next decade and beyond. Nick, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Really good to be here. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career? As I mentioned, you've been in the engineering space for a while. So I just wonder if you can just tell us how you got into the industry, how your career's developed to what it is today.
This won't take long. I don't like talking about myself, but I'm an engineer, UK-based educated engineer, who immediately had to leave the UK upon receiving their university degree and went to South Africa. And that was my entree into the mining industry. Joined what's now Anglo-American in South Africa and was in operations for 4 or 5 years, and actually longer, 6 or 7 years. And then got the urge to join services group, an engineering and construction group in the late 1980s. And I've basically spent my career, I'm a bit of a one-trick pony, Rob, spent my career in mining, servicing the mining industry or mining minerals and metals, and found myself in Australia about 16 years ago, again, servicing the mining industry. And I guess somebody said, when you've spent this amount of time in mining, when I say somebody, my ex-boss said, you should be pretty good at plotting a growth pathway for a mining minerals and metals business. And that's basically what I do today here.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of our audience will know of Worley. Obviously, our audience is around the world and globally. But I wonder if you just give us a snapshot of Worley to people that may not know the company and maybe people that are listening who are outside of our mining industry.
Sure. Worley is a global business domiciled in Australia, Australian listed, but operates in 46 different countries today, has over 50,000 people. And we operate across 4 sectors, all in the engineering, chemicals and resources space. But the sectors that we serve would be first, I'll put mining first or resources first, then the traditional energy sector, the low carbon energy sector, and chemicals and fuels. And we've established a very strong purpose, and our purpose really is to deliver a more sustainable world to the industries that we serve.
With the global push towards electrification and obviously renewable energy, if you look at copper, nickel, lithium and other minerals geared towards the energy transition and obviously becoming more critical, and obviously at the same time there's going to be challenges such as supply chain price volatility, obviously to contend with. What do you see the biggest challenge for the mining industry facing the meeting in terms of supply?
Robert, I tend to look at that sort of supply gap that you're alluding to as through a project development lens, because unless we build more stuff, build more assets, build more mines, we're not going to fill that supply gap that you've just spoken about. So there are a number of challenges that face our industry today. Start with the obvious, which is exploration. We're simply not finding enough major deposits that prove to be economically viable in today's environment. So in the immediate last 12 years to talk about copper, which I consider to be the bellwether mineral in energy transition. We've discovered about 20% of the material new mines, 20% of those, the rate of those that were discovered in the preceding 20 years. So that's a bit of a scary statistic. So number one, exploration. We're just simply not finding the metal in the ground and turning it into a mineral reserve. Secondly, it's the time to develop mines these days. From first drill core in the ground to producing, let's say again, copper. The average time to bring a mine into production is 16.9 years. And that statistic is 4 or 5 years old now. So today, it will be longer than that, I can guarantee it. I think the industry at the moment, we realize that we're about to face the biggest deployment of capital in the history of mankind. And I'm talking about the energy transition capital, providing metal to fuel that energy transition. And mining is very capital intensive, right? So accessing sufficient capital, patient capital that's needed in mining, because the rewards come over decades, not months. So that's a very big challenge for miners today. And then, of course, last but not least, commodity prices are not really playing the game. They haven't yet responded to those future demand. And indeed, some commodities today are a little bit in excess. Take lithium and nickel as two examples of being excess supply to demand. So it's very hard to talk about a basket of commodities with the same comments. But I think all of those challenges that I've explained, and on top of that, an escalation environment that we've pitched into, those are some of the main challenges that we face today.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about ESG. So I wonder what are some of the challenges in our industry, and how has ESG evolved during, obviously, your time in the industry?
It is evolving, and that's the conundrum, isn't it? That we need more metal to fuel the energy transition, but the elevated ESG requirements that I guess quite rightly being imposed upon miners mean that it lengthens the time and the costs of getting that metal to market. So that's the conundrum that miners face today. What miners need is certainty of that process and I guess speed. There's always been in mining, when it comes to the sort of permitting and approval side, there's always been a polarized set of views, a spectrum of views. And the East is always quite far from the West in terms of that spectrum of views. But in the past, I would say that there was a very healthy and densely populated middle views that were able to kind of broker the polarized ends towards an acceptable outcome. I guess as a reflection of maybe even society today, I think the polarization may be a little bit more extreme. In other words, the East is a little bit further from the West. But more importantly, there's very densely populated ends of the spectrum and a fairly sparsely populated middle. So therefore, that polarization effect has almost been amplified. So I think miners are battling with that the stakeholders at each end of the spectrum, maybe arguably getting further apart, not closer together. And it's up to miners to bring that together, because there's a lot of unlike minds, if you like, in that equation. With energy transition materials, and this is part of the evolution, bulk commodities, energy transition requires or demands both upstream and midstream processing. And actually that requirement to process amplifies again the complexity of permitting and the complexity of the ESG, and the whole governance around it. So that's our challenge. The industry, the regulators, the approvers, that's the challenge, that we not only need to, bring some certainty to all of that, but also work upon the pace that we come to those outcomes.
When it comes to mining projects, and obviously Worley are involved in many projects around the world, there's evidence of a trust gap between local communities, regulators, various stakeholders. How do you see this being addressed, and everyone, I suppose, working better than we currently are?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually something that's really close to my heart. We have a saying here actually at Worley, which is projects move at the pace of trust. Particularly, that's all projects, by the way, but particularly if there's any innovation in it. And we're moving into an arena where miners and industry is becoming more innovative, and maybe speak a little bit more about that later. But so, if you can't find, or I guess it's our job as the industry to find a common purpose against which everybody can align and form a common goal, right? Common goal, common purpose, and align behind it. Finding that when there's an absence of trust is very, very difficult. Building trust requires listening, understanding, patience, empathy. And in fact, there are four actual legs of the trust chair, if you like. And the unfortunate truth is that if any one of the legs is not there, the chair falls over. So you've got to be really good at all four legs of trust, building trust. And they're in no particular order. There's reliability. You've got to do what you say. You've got to be open. So it's openness. That means I give and I ask for feedback regularly. And then a really important one is acceptance. In other words, who you are as an individual is okay with me. And when you're disagreeing with people in the room, you may be disagreeing on everything because of the polarity of the what's at stake. It's really important to say, but I may disagree with you, but who you are as a person is still okay with me. And if you can get to that, that helps to build that trust that is often missing. And then the last is just congruence. What I say is what I mean. In other words, do your words and your actions line up? And I think all parties, need to practice a little bit more on those four legs of that trust chair.
Other ways miners can work to obviously reduce the permitting and approval timeframes. And I suppose going on from that question, I did a recent podcast and we were speaking about the permitting in New Zealand, which is now being heavily reduced, the permitting timeframes. So they're probably doing something maybe different than a lot of other countries and jurisdictions around the world. So, yeah, what are your thoughts in way we can maybe reduce permitting and approval timeframes?
Yeah, it's not my area of expertise, but I look what other industries have done when they've been faced with a burning platform, like the pharmaceutical industry. When we had COVID-19, they, took a 10-year process and did it in one. Look at the German gas industry that were going to run out of fuel, a couple of winters ago, and they permitted and built on the run because, people were going to get cold in the winter. So in the absence of a burning platform, nothing really changes. But if there is a burning platform, it's amazing what humanity can do to speed up the process. But, just intuitively, if you're looking for what miners can do, we can make sure we get accurate information into the hands of all stakeholders as quickly as possible. And we don't miss out anything. We get all the information as quickly as possible into the hands of stakeholders. We need to put our very best talent on the engagement process, the social engagement, the community engagement, the permitting and approval process. It's not a training ground for the young and innocent. It's putting our very best talent in that arena to make sure that we give it the attention that it deserves. Because a lot of people talk about how do miners sort of control the dialogue. I don't think that it's possible to control the dialogue. But if you lose control of the dialogue, then it's hard to get it back. What we can get better at it is at influencing the dialogue around the permitting process and hopefully get our case across that we're part of the solution, not the problem.
Looking ahead, what are the opportunities and risks when it comes to an automated future within our mining industry? And obviously automation, again, is being talked about a lot in other industries and obviously including mining industry, and it's slowly increasing within mining. So yeah, just wondering if you just tell us about some of the opportunities and risks with automation in our industry.
Opportunities are enormous, and of course they're fairly well understood, and they're the most obvious ones are in safety, productivity improvements, and repeatability of tasks that lend themselves to an automated approach. And I think some of the challenges that go hand in hand with that is that I think miners often underestimate the degree of change management that is associated with automating a process that's done manually today. So, looking at how that automation process impacts people, processes, and systems is very often underestimated. I think miners actually, there is sufficient technology available today that if you just had a clean sheet of paper in front of you, I think miners could automate a lot more of their operations than we do today. But I think we resist some of that temptation sometimes. Well, firstly, there's capital involved, and miners spend capital quite carefully. But if you just set that aside, the change management is something, but also these big decisions on automation can impact your social license to operate. Because miners realize, and in most locations around the world, but certainly in areas like Africa and South America, mining is a very, very big influence as an employer on the local community. And that local community relies upon the opportunities that miners deliver. And so if you're changing the fundamentals of how you do some of your tasks on the mine and replacing it with automation opportunities, that could impact the employment opportunities if it's in a brownfield arena. And you're changing the nature of the engagement with the local community. And I think miners deeply respect that. And therefore, they take those decisions very carefully because they don't want to impact those relationships that they value. You take, for instance, the ultimate, which is going to a remote mine operations center that can be done in a city. That's bad news for a local mining community or local community that's around the mine. So that's an extreme example, but I think that's evidence of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. You mentioned obviously there's examples of where miners can improve some of their tasks by using automation. Just wonder if you can just give us some, I suppose, basic examples where you're probably seeing miners are not necessarily can do certain tasks better if it was automated.
Well, I think mining is coming to terms with where to make the highest impact with automation. And I think certainly the arenas that have enjoyed the best attention would be in, collision control, automation and collision management and collision alarms. So a lot of incidents and accidents in mining happen when there's lots of mobile fleet around. So collision avoidance systems and the automation of that is an obvious area where miners have really lent in. But there's so much opportunity, Rob, across the entire value chain. It's about where to pick the low-hanging fruit, where to have the highest impact without too much risk attached, and again, without impacting that social license.
There's a lot of discussion about moving to underground mining. Do you see this as a solution to increase supply of critical resources? And are there any particular benefits in moving to underground mining?
It's not the solution. It's a part of the equation. Moving to underground, let's say you've got an open cut mine today and you're moving, and there's, a delineation of the ore body, a continuation of the ore body that says we can go underground and we can justify going underground. Normally, depending upon the commodity, but normally that ends up with a net deficit of metal because while sometimes the grades underground are better, the volume that you mine is that much smaller. So therefore, yes, you've extended the life of mine, but you've had a net deficit of metal production as a function of going underground. If you're talking about a greenfield environment, absolutely, if we could find enough underground, economically viable ore, miners would want to mine it. But it's a very highly capital intensive arena. The risks involved in underground mining are much higher. The ability to learn and understand your ore body when it's underground is not as good as if it's closer to surface. So your understanding of the geology and the, any faulting that might be underground, which is only obvious once you get down there, you don't often find it. So risks go up, capital goes up, length of time to deliver goes up. But there are some advantages, of course. There's less dust, less noise, less visible operations to those around, sometimes less volume, therefore less traffic around on the surface. So there are environmental advantages often to be underground. But of course, from a safety point of view, having people, materials, and ore all fighting and competing for the same space underground is intrinsically a more dangerous environment. So that's part of the solution. We definitely need more underground mining, and the rules of probability say that there'll be more underground mining ahead of us than historically. That's where deposits are going, but it's only part of the plan. We've got to deliver lots more metal from a variety of sources, and they're going to include open pit, underground. They're going to include waste streams. They're going to include, going into a more circular economy to find the metal that we require.
What are some of the long-term global trends you think will shape the mining industry over the next decade? Whether those are obviously sustainable goals or other factors, and how should miners, I suppose, prepare for these in current times?
Not a great crystal ball looker, but although it's part of my job to imagine what that might look like. Maybe at a high level, I expect miners to be a lot more embracing of technology, right from AI and automation, right the way through to new process technology, which hopefully will unlock those ore bodies of the future and make them more economical and safer to operate in. So, we need to drive down cost. We need to improve efficiencies. Technology is going to play a much bigger role in the future than it has done in the past. Miners are slow adopters traditionally of technology. That's got to change. I think we're going to get more and more metal from what you people would now think is waste streams or recovered streams. I think sources of already permitted material out there, it may be in a rock dump or tailings dam or whatever, will be a resource of the future. I see lots of new partnerships developing, to try and get access to that patient capital and for downstream metal users to secure their supply chain. I see new partnerships developing across mining that haven't previously been needed. And those partnerships go from potential customers and offtake agreements right the way through to technology providers and even governments. We're seeing more and more government involvement in many jurisdictions because of the concerns about supply chain. And I don't see that stopping in the short term. And if and when commodity prices do respond to the demand shortages, then the temptation of government to get more and more involved obviously increases. And then I think that circular economy will become a lot more part of mining speak. We even speak today about urban mining. Just put yourself 10 years in the future and we're going to have, electric vehicle batteries coming to the end of their first generation life. And we're going to have lots of metal sitting in the garages of mankind that needs to be mined in the future. And so where we get our material in the future won't just be down a hole.
And lastly, I wonder if there's anything else that you'd like to add. The listeners are generally from people within our mining industry. And I suppose we have had a tough year, maybe a tough few years in our industry. And hopefully we are at a turning point within our industry that things will hopefully get better. So I wondered if there was anything else that you would like to add and maybe give our audience.
I just think mining, if you've been in mining for longer than a decade, you've seen a cycle, right? It's a cyclical industry. So we're a bunch that's used to facing adversity. But the type of adversity that we're facing in the future is not going to be the type that we faced in the past, which is, a continuation of that cyclicity. Although obviously cycles will come and go. But the cycle that we're in, if the energy transition does not fail, the cycle is going to be the longest in the history of mining. And that means we need to do our very best to, influence that narrative that I spoke about earlier and attract the very best talent to our industry to meet those obligations. Because if we don't, we'll fail to live up to even our own expectations. Now is still a good time to be in mining compared to any time in my history. So I'm very happy to still be a part of it.
Nick, appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the podcast, showing your expertise and obviously passion for the mining industry and telling us about what Worley do as a company globally. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow Worley as a company and I suppose look at all the projects that you're working on globally, how can they follow you? What social media platform channels are yourself and Worley on?
Well, you can find me and Worley on LinkedIn, of course. We have a very interactive website, worley.com. And, I love being part of a mining dialogue. So making contact, being part of our global community, that's what this is all about. So certainly invite anybody who's interested to connect with the network.
Yeah, great. And all those will be in the show notes, the company's podcast for easy access. So all the best for the remainder of the year, which isn't long left. And obviously, have a great 2025.
To you too, Rob, and to your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. And as we get closer to the end of the year, please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And as I always say, don't just share these episodes within the mining industry. Please share them outside of our mining industry. We're only going to increase our presence or make people aware outside of the mining industry what we actually do and how important mining is to our future. Thank you again. And as always, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.